back to the Washington Outsider Report on the Coalition Radio. For those newly joining the program, my name is Irina Zuckerman, and I'm the editor-in-chief of the Washington Outsider. With us today, we have a special guest, Mubin Shaikh. He's a counterterrorism professional from Canada. He's had 30 years of assorted public safety experience, which includes counterterrorism, emergency incident management, and other things. And we're here to talk a little bit about some of the lessons learned from that background, as well as what is the latest trends in counterterrorism in US-Canada security relations and other related issues. Thank you so much for joining us today, Mubin.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So before I start with more of the formal questions, could you just tell us a little bit more in depth about yourself, how you got into this area, what drew you to that particular field, and where were you working?
Yeah, okay. Well, in middle school, I wanted to be a brain surgeon, but my math was not very good. So my brain surgeon career ended before it began. When I got to high school, I had a really good time in high school. I wasn't bullied, I wasn't picked on. We were the cool kids of school. And I had a house party. My parents had left the home, and I decided to have a party, invited my friends. Unfortunately for me, my father had told his brother, my uncle, to check on the house while he was gone. So in the middle of the party, my uncle came in, walked through, like kicked the door basically, and came in, and I got into a lot of trouble. I was told that I had defiled the home. I had dishonored the family. And in especially Indian Muslim context, that's my background. My parents are from India. I'm born and raised in Toronto, Canada. And basically, I told myself that the only way I'm going to fix this is to, quote, get religious. So in the summer of 1995, I would go to India and Pakistan. And in Pakistan, I would end up meeting the Taliban while I was there before their takeover of Afghanistan the first time in the fall of 1995. I became enamored by them. I wanted to be like them. I started to dress like them. I had a turban, black turban, big beard. If you would have seen me from my past life, you would think I was Taliban. I became a supporter, the jihadi cause and this whole jihadi ideology. The West is evil, everyone is evil, and jihad is the only way forward. I then kind of associated with some more extreme individuals from the Salafi, Takfiri worldview. These are people who are, extreme in the way in which they view others, other Muslims. And actually, what happened is in 1998, I got married. My wife is actually Polish. She converted to Islam. We met in high school. I don't know how, by the grace of God, miracle of God, that she agreed to marry me. Um, and we'll be married 27 years in this December. So and so it what it did is it calmed me down a lot. I think because of my intimacy needs were met. So I thought the idea of me having a future with a family that became more important to me. So I wasn't fully out. This helped a lot. And I kept, I was still with the brothers, as we call them. A number of things were happening at the time, of course. First in 1996, the invasion of Chechnya. So a lot of the first jihadi CDs, jihadi videos, started to come out at that time. It was called the Russian Hell series. They
Mhm.
were on CDs, and so that's where I saw my first beheading video. But it had all the other attacks, of course, on armored
Mhm.
personnel carriers and soldiers and so on. 1998, a guy named Osama bin Laden came out with the fatwa. So we were intently watching and following the developments at that time. The bombings, of course, that happened in Tanzania and Kenya. But then 9/11 happened, and 9/11 really shook me because I thought I understand jihad against the enemy, but this I don't understand. Flying planes into buildings, it's a civilian
Mhm.
target. I
Mhm.
wasn't okay with that. And I realized that I didn't study Arabic and Islamic studies formally and properly. And so I would actually move to Syria in 2002, and I lived there for 2 years. I studied Arabic and Islamic studies. I was teaching English, and I was doing a degree by distance education from Canada. 2 years later, I had enough. I had a newfound appreciation for the rights that we have in the West, especially Muslims. And when the first week that I got back, the first Canadian has been arrested on terrorism charges. So this is the
Mhm.
first Canadian arrested according to the 2001 terrorism legislation in Canada. When I saw him in the newspaper, I recognized him. He was Momin Khawaja, arrested in connection with the 2004 London fertilizer bomb plot. Momin Khawaja sat to the left of me in the Quran school we went to as kids. And I said to the intelligence service, this is a mistake. I know the family, it's a good family, this can't be. And they said to me, well, it's no mistake, but the fact that you're calling us about him, we want to come and talk to you. So they came and they talked to me. I told them my life story, and they basically told me, look, we would love for you to work for us. We want you to, tell us who's the good guy, who's the bad guy, basically. Now, the bad friends that I had, the extremist friends, when I left to Syria, they thought I was escalating. They thought I was increasing in my radicalization. In 2003, remember the war in Iraq happened, and I was invited to go and fight in Iraq, but thankfully chose not to go, of course, because I wasn't there for that. I was there to study.
Mhm.
So I was recruited by the intelligence service. I worked a number of investigations. One of the investigations, the last one, became a very public investigation in Canada. In 2006, 18 individuals were arrested in connection with planning related to catastrophic terrorist attacks in Canada. So I was actually the undercover in that case. That was the big case that kind of made me public. But I had been working undercover in other cases. But long story short, in the end of 2005, I went with them. We had a training camp. In the early 2006, we escalated. We looked for safe houses. We looked for more targets. We tried to recruit more people. And then in the summer, all these guys got arrested. Then it took 4 years of court to prosecute the case because there were so many people and there are different hearings that needed to take place. 2010, I was done. I became a public person. I went onto Facebook and Twitter. And in 2011, the war in Syria started. Then by 2012, I started to see the rise of ISIS in real time. I could see exactly what was going on, people talking about going to fight. A lot of those people, I was debating with them. I was trying to, argue with them. And I was also running some fake accounts so that I could infiltrate into their networks, which I did. The US government actually saw what I was doing and basically invited me to come to the States and teach some of their people to do what I had been doing. But then the war against ISIS really kicked off. And so from 2012 really to 2020, when COVID hit, I was very involved in anti-ISIS activities for the U.S. military, was doing a lot of training, pre-deployment training for special operations forces who are going to fight ISIS. And around that same time, about 2015, 16, I linked up with an American NGO called Parents for Peace. It's parents, the number four, peace.org. And that's an organization that I currently work with where we do direct one-on-one interventions with radicalized individuals, those who have been charged with terrorism offenses, some of whom were not charged, some of whom their parents called us, or another family member might have called us because of so I deal with that on a daily basis. Um, and yeah, that's basically what I've been doing in my life so far.
Curiosity, when you started encountering the extremist organizations early on in your life, what made you decide that that is the religious path you wanted to take, as opposed to very observant Muslims who nevertheless do not engage in political type of activity for just, observant Muslims?
Very good question. I think the reason for that was the house party that I had because I think, growing up with an identity crisis. My
Mm-hmm,
Muslim community was calling me one direction, the West, and my non-Muslim friends are calling me to another direction. And I
mm-hmm,
think the identity crisis is one of the most common ingredients and elements when we're talking about radicalization in the West. And so that identity conflict came to a head at that party, and I felt that I needed to choose. The
mm-hmm,
pressure from my family was incredible.
mm-hmm,
They really wanted, because this was such a terrible thing that I had done in their view.
mm-hmm,
And so I told myself that I would just dive into this new religious identity. And I kind of didn't know what that a new identity was supposed to be
mm-hmm,
until I went to Pakistan and I met the Taliban. And meeting them, they brought together the identity that I was seeking. There was a militancy to it, a toughness. The religious aspect was there, the sense of belonging, meaning, greatness, right? Contributing to something great, especially
mm-hmm.
something that links back to the early Islamic period. So a lot of these guys, to this day, Al-Qaeda and them, they basically play the role of early Muslim, pure. They're religious. They're free from, all faults. That's how we thought. And so that's why I got into that particular manifestation at that time. Of
How did
course, it
you?
was in
Mm-hmm,
Syria is where I was introduced to Sufism,
mm-hmm.
and I remain Sufi. I follow one of the traditional Sufi orders, and but when I was young and stupid,
Mm-hmm.
I was on the other side.
How did you meet the Taliban specifically? Because in India, there's lots of different organizations, but Taliban is more Afghan and Pakistan early at the
Yeah.
time.
So it was in Pakistan. I was sent to a city called Quetta.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody who knows Quetta, I mean, Quetta has been a hotspot since the
Sure.
90s. And another town nearby called Mastoon.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where we stayed. So it was in the Pakistan trip that I ended up in Quetta and Mastoon, where I would meet the Taliban because the border is literally
Mm-hmm.
right there, if you want to call it a border. But that whole Fatah territory was like right there.
So I
So
will get back to the Taliban a little bit later because it's very curious. I think there's a lot of the young Westerners, especially non-Muslims, who end up converting to Islam and just to join the Taliban, may not necessarily have the correct idea of what they'll be encountering. I think they have an idea that's based on propaganda, but not necessarily direct experience. But
yeah.
I'll get to that. Actually, what I wanted to ask you first, though. I wanted to ask you about your undercover experiences once you really got into that area. And reflecting on your time in total, specifically being undercover, not just everything else what you've been doing. What would you say was the most strategically significant moment that reshaped your understanding of modern terrorism?
While I was an undercover, is
Yeah.
your yeah, limiting to that. Um, I think I'd have to really, but it was really, I remember the callousness of the conversations that I would have with the targets,
Mm-hmm.
with other extremists, and the way in which they thought. Like even though I became pretty radicalized, I was definitely an extremist, a supporter of jihadi attacks overseas, not domestically. You had people who were very quick to dehumanize other people and how easily they concluded that you could kill people. For me, it was not that easy. There had to be a very specific logical and religious argument.
Mm-hmm.
But what really got me was the complete ease at which these people could do this. And why I'm saying this in response to your question about strategic implications for terrorism in the modern age is just because of how, people fixate on whether it's ideology or grievances or all these different factors that they kind of attribute in terrorism or in radicalization, extremism, whatever. Um, it was the quickness and the ease at which somebody could arrive at that conclusion and say, yeah, it's okay to kill these people. And I thought about it even then that wow, how easy they've made it for themselves that they can just do this. And meanwhile, in Syria, when I was studying, it was you had to, I mean, there was a lot of study related to, it was more legalistic, if you will, it was more
Sure.
detailed. Whereas in this, it was very simple, very superficial, very emotional, and very quick. And that bothered me, is that how quickly somebody can arrive at that conclusion. Because once you've arrived at that conclusion, taking the next step, although not easy, is not as difficult.
Would it be fair to say that most of the people who were engaged in that sort of action were not particularly learned? They were not scholars, they were just activists.
Yeah, you get a mix of all different types, right? You will get those who are very knowledgeable and they can quote
Mhm,
chapter and verse.
mhm,
And then you get, the dummies who they don't know, or they might just be playing a role, right? Some people, they'll have a beard, they'll have robe, turban, and everything, but they
mhm,
don't understand Arabic. They don't understand the most basic things of the religion. So they
mhm.
look the part,
Sure.
right? But they're not really intellectually qualified. So you get all different kinds. You do get people who are scholarly, at least they think they are, and
Mhm,
then you get those that are not, right? They're
mhm.
just behaviorally radicalized.
And would you say that the behaviorally radicalized were the ones who were most quick to dehumanize as opposed
Absolutely.
to
Yeah.
engage in the debate? Yeah, yeah. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
so would you say that recruitment methods of these types of all sorts of people shifted over time? And if they did, how did you have to adjust to that, especially in encrypted online spaces where these people, probably engage in a lot more vetting of um of anyone who enters those spaces, basically.
Yeah, I mean, recruiting narratives, I mean, I think generally it hasn't changed.
Mm-hmm.
There's a war on Islam. The
Mm-hmm.
West is engaged in this war in with the assistance of the rulers of Muslim countries.
Hmm.
And what are you going to do about it?
Right.
That's the basic recruiting line,
Mm-hmm.
right? They point to the grievance, they point to the situation, they
Mm-hmm.
interpret the situation according to how they see it. They put to you the situation, the scenario. Here's what's happening. Now the option is brought forward. What is the option? There are many different things you could do in face of this situation, but we prefer jihad. Why? Because people understand the language of violence. And
Mm-hmm.
this is a recruiting narrative that is shared across the spectrum, not just Islamists. You see all these neo-Nazi
Sure.
accelerationists or others.
Mm-hmm.
It's about that violence. It's about doing
Mm-hmm.
those evil acts, right? If you want to go back to, the whole propaganda of the deed, right? So everybody understands that. So in that respect, I would say that nothing's really changed. Um, However, it does have to be tweaked, once in a while and made unique depending on the situation. So when we were recruiting people, we would pay attention to what was the scenario and the situation that we were in. What background was this person coming from? Did they have a tribal link or like an ethnic link to the conflict? Were they, like in the case of converts, they have no ethnic link or any other link. Like, what is this white guy or black guy? Like, why is he? So then you started to look at what else is happening in this person's life. Are they estranged from their parents? Are they criminals who are trying to fix their life, but they're still criminals and they just want some kind of justification? So we looked at those specific contexts and then we tailored the recruiting to that. Now, on the last point about like, and what do you do now with encrypted rooms and this, that, and the other? And I remember because I'm that old in the 90s, there was no internet. There
Sure.
was no encrypted chat rooms. You had to physically go and meet people, or you spoke to them on the phone, right? That was it. Um, and then even in some of those, like for example, one of the rooms that I got into, you had to physically go and meet somebody who would physically hand you a piece of paper with the login credentials of the website. And then you would go
Sure.
back to your home and you would do it that way, right? So there was that physical link that you had to have. Now, of course, that the need for that link is eliminated. And a lot of these, and unfortunately, and this is the problem that ISIS had, is they opened the door to everybody, right? And so everybody came, the spies included, right? Al Qaeda, not so much. They're not like that. Just
Sure.
anybody can come. They're not going to take a 16-year-old school child, because they who wants to join the jihad because they want to live like a hero or something. But ISIS opened the door to everybody, and everybody got in. And they're even their encrypted, so-called encrypted. I mean, what's really encrypted these days, right? I mean, we
Mhm.
want people to think their
Mhm.
platforms that they use are encrypted, but are they?
Well, the Telegram isn't, I can tell you that for sure, but the worst kept secret
Yeah,
ever.
yeah. Yeah, let
Um,
them think that. Let them think.
mhm.
And in many cases, in some cases, I wouldn't say many, but they think they're talking to ISIS or Al Qaeda or whomever, and what do you know? It's an undercover, and the undercover is running everything through their server. And they've used the same tactics, like the FBI, for example, has used these tactics against pedophiles, for example.
Sure.
They'll run the server, they'll run the website, and they'll collect information on everybody who comes to that site, right? So
Mhm.
there's a lot of ways to compromise them.
Mhm. Well, that's good to know. Although I have to say, being exposed to this area, I was surprised how many pedophiles there are. And, personally, I not only don't understand the attraction, but I'm just surprised because for something that's supposed to be so off the charts, abnormal, it seems to be fairly common. And that is what's deeply concerning. And
Mhm.
with a lot of these extremists, yes, it's extremism in the sense that it takes to the extreme the dehumanization and taking of the common life, but how easily average people can become extreme in their views, that's also surprisingly common. So given that you will probably encounter a lot of people whose mentality, if not psychology, was deeply abnormal in terms of the way they relate to human beings. Did you find yourself experiencing psychological toll from long-term infiltration into these networks?
Mhm.
And if so, how did you balance your operational objectives with personal resilience and not getting sucked into the double life, basically?
Yeah, very good question. When you're doing it, you don't know it's happening to you, right?
Hmm.
I mean, and then you do it for a little bit, and then you realize that there are things happening to you. One of the most common symptoms, I guess, or consequences is hypervigilance, right? You're always looking over, you're always looking around, who's here, who's there, who's there, because it forms a part of your habit when you're working. So I mean, I went through. I think there was one time where I specifically remember the moral dilemma, right? That here I am. So basically, we were in the mosque, we were lined up for prayer, and we're praying behind the imam. It was like a regular mosque, I do my takbir and I come into prayer, and I'm just thinking to myself, oh Allah, what am I doing here? Like I'm with these guys. They think I'm their brother.
Hmm.
I'm playing like I'm their brother. and yet they're gonna get ruined, right?
Mm-hmm.
When everything is done. Like, how do I? But while in prayer, I was just overcome with this feeling of, yeah, but Mubin, look at what they're planning on doing. And they were planning on doing catastrophic terrorist attacks. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
didn't give them the idea for that, right? Like, they came up with the idea, they did everything. So so that really got rid of any moral problems I might have had. I remember also I went to go see the target number one, or target number two, as we call him. And I went to meet him outside the building, and he came down with his infant daughter. And he came in, he handed his daughter to me, and the daughter came to me, and I was cooing her and like playing with her and smiling and being joyful. But in my brain, I was thinking, oh my God, what's going to happen to this girl? I'm responsible for this. I'm doing this, right? So these were the kinds of things that would come into my mind. But again, I told myself that, look, I'm not doing anything. I didn't do this. I didn't say bring your daughter down, do this, do that. And I even gave them chances, right? Like, and so this was, I think, part of the answer as well, like what I did. And these are things I did of my own volition. I was not directed to do this by the services. And in fact, in some cases, they didn't like it. For I give you a good example, day two when I met the first day that I met these guys and I got into the group and they invited me to their training camp and they wanted me to be the instructor at the training camp and I had the information that I needed. And so I just said, hey, you know what? I don't want to be around here because it's too public of a place because it was a public event that we met at. And I told the guy, target number two, I said, let's meet you and me just alone. And so we met, and at the time I was with the service, and the federal police were also running a parallel investigation. And I exposed the surveillance vehicles that were following us. I wrote down their
The
license plate
police, right?
numbers. It
Mm-hmm.
was the police. Yeah, it was the
Mm-hmm.
police. But I was with the service, so I didn't know who
Right.
they were.
Mm-hmm.
So, so I wrote down their license plates, make and model of the cars and everything, and I showed it to him. I was like, dude, I'm like, there's a lot of heat on you. Maybe you should slow down and maybe
Mm-hmm.
pause what you're doing, right? Nobody told me to say that. And
Mm-hmm.
they certainly did not like the fact that I exposed all their surveillance. Like they were like, Sheikh, you shouldn't have done that.
Mm-hmm.
But that's okay. I can live with that. And even in court, the defense lawyers tried to attack me and say, don't you think that you put those police officers' lives in danger because of what you did? Of course, the answer is no, because they're police and they have guns, and we didn't have any guns, so
Mm-hmm.
their lives are not under threat. But that was the point. The point was is that they didn't like that. And even the defense, they just tried to portray it in a negative way. So I knew what I was doing was right. And so there were things that were happening with me morally, psychologically. I recognized it and I dealt with it, and that's
Mm-hmm.
just the way that and I just continued doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, it's easy to judge when you're not in the situation, but when you're talking to these people, you need to think what's going to be most effective then from your position. So that's all there is to it. Um, can you share an instance where a small detail, which could be normally easily overlooked, became a pivotal lead for your work?
Okay. Scanning my memories for turned out to be an important lead. Okay, I'll give you this example. The 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 apartment building in which the target number two lived, um, there were there were exit signs at the end of each of the hallway, right? The each ends of the hallway. Um, and these guys were very paranoid, or they were hyper vigilant. They were always on, they were looking for or worried about a government intrusion or surveillance or whatever else. And I didn't think it was a good idea to put because they needed cameras there somehow, right? And I guess the exit sign was the only thing too. And so the hallway was the only place that they could put the cameras. And of course, because of their hypervigilance, they went and they looked in the sign and they found the camera, right? So the thing that which people don't might not think that you have to understand if these are hypervigilant people, you cannot just do surveillance in a normal way because they're going to be looking for that, right? So that's an example of something that you should really look at how the target is, how they think, how they behave, really understand it, and you know, be more creative is what I want to say. Be more creative. Use your imagination when you're conducting surveillance on people like that.
I'd say it's probably true, not just about surveillance, but anything related to dealing with them in general.
Yes.
So moving to this, how did the evolution of ideology in jihadist, or for that matter, also any far right circles, um, in your opinion, challenge traditional assumptions about profiling and human terrain analysis? Because there's been a lot of literature about profiling of these types of people, but the way I see it, it's not always lining up with reality. It seems to be a lot of theories and a lot of assumptions and a lot of projections and a lot of kind of Hollywoodizing, but I'm not sure how accurate all of that is.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I laughed because you have to be really careful with research articles because, and again, I'm not, dismissing obviously all academics. That's silly. But understand even research papers, who they're written by, right? These are, remember, like, and I might be, I might be making some generalizations, but follow me for a moment. You have professors or PhDs or whatever, like their function in life is to produce research papers. So those articles, there's a vested interest in, like academics to put out articles, right? Like that's how they measure their value. That's the currency in academia, especially for somebody who's aspiring to be a tenured professor or whatever it is. You have to have all these publications out. And especially in a world like this, much of the research is done in a very let's call it sterile environment, right? Very, lab environment where you can use, small sample groups. It's easy to produce research based on theories and or like assumptions or fantasies or projections, as you say. I've seen all those things in the research material that's out there. So I take a lot of the research stuff with a grain of salt, unless the individual is a practitioner or has some familiarity with it. A perfect example, and I'm very privileged and I'm grateful that I had the experiences that I've had, my own personal experience, but also a participant observer experience as an undercover in a terrorist cell or in extremist networks. You can't get ethical approval as a academic to be a participant observer in a terrorist group or an extremist group, right? So how are you going to get that kind of data, right? So I can get that data because I'm a part of that data. I'm creating the data, right? So I take a lot of this because I've been consuming writings on radicalization for a long time, and there's a lot of good stuff out there, and I'm not gonna make the mistake of saying that, oh, you have to be a practitioner and that's the only way, whatever. No, there are very great scholars that I follow and I'm indebted to. They've helped my own understanding of the topic. But even me myself, I've been very intellectual about it. I taught, I studied some, when I was doing the undergraduate degree, like in logic and things like that. So I was aware of my biases. I would ask myself, why am I thinking this? Is it because of personal experience that I've had? And now I've developed a stereotype in my mind, and I'm using that, as the basis from which I then arrive at other conclusions. So I had this intellectual process myself, even when I'm consuming the other academic materials. So, so yeah, in a lot of those cases, some of those you will find that it does resonate with reality, and in many cases, I would say it just does not. And like you said, I find this a lot projection by the academic themselves. They may be coming from an activist background. For example, it's really funny for it's not funny, but it's crazy that I was on the other side, and then I've come on to this side, and then I see how, for example, so when the Islamist radicalization has been a big problem for a very long time, and a lot of Muslim academics who I would say have an activist lens projected in their research, right? So now let's say they are a professor and they are a PhD, and they will use their platform to put out their activism, right, in the form of academia, right? Then you start to find like silly things that they make up, like, denying the role of ideology. This is a big mistake. I don't take anybody seriously who denies the role of ideology. Because I've grown up, I've born and raised in these environments and these communities, like, and not just the Indian community. I grew up with the Arabs, with the West Africans, with you name it. Okay. So, but of course, you don't want to make the mistake of over reliance on ideology. And then another mistake that some people make is confusing Islamist ideology with the Islamic religion is a big mistake, because one of the things that got me to be in this space of countering terrorism is what I learned in Islam, that terrorists are criminals in Islam. They're criminals. And in fact, it's the death penalty for terrorists, people who do the things that we call terrorists. What they do in Islam is the death penalty. And in Islam, the Prophet, peace be upon him, he warned us about these people. Very famous tradition, do not overdo yourselves with the religion, for the religion will overtake you. Okay. Or other nations were destroyed before you, who engaged in extremism. Okay, that's another one. Or the Khawarij. The Khawarij is a title for an ancient sect of Muslims who were terrorists, we would call them today. Um, and they were hyper worshipers. So they memorized Quran, they prayed long prayers, they fasted, many, many times. So they were overtly religious. And so here I'm looking at the hadith where the Prophet ﷺ is saying they will come in the form of religious people. So why would I need to deny the role of religious ideology in extremism in the name of Islam? The Prophet told us about them, alayhi salam. So, so people, I think Muslims, who they wanted to show that no, 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 this has nothing to do with Islam. Like that's the approach that they took. But it was like public relations. They were doing public relations for Islam. So a lot of these Muslim academics who I ended up running into and clashing with some of them, they would completely deny the role of ideology. They would try to attribute it to other things, right? Um, and this actually was prevalent in the Nordic countries as well. Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Finland, and other places where they were like, no, 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 no. It's because these people don't have the right jobs. They have had a bad experience, this, that, and the other. I'm like, no, it's not. I mean, a guy who takes on Salafi ideology and suddenly I can't work with Jews, I can't work with women, I can't work with the kuffar. Well, what kind of a job are you going to have? What are you going to be left with? And now that you have a crappy job and your life is garbage, now you're gonna blame the West that my situation is this bad because the West hates me because I'm a Muslim. You see that circle, that cycle of reinforcement, right? So it's not because of that. The guy willingly does not want to have a job with your people, right? Like they hate your society. It's a kuffar society, so they're not going to, have any loyalty to it or think, how can I make this society better? They don't think like that, right? So, anyways, back to the academics, the activist academics projecting their. Another example is I heard this the most silly thing about, oh, and a lot of this radicalization is based on junk science. Okay, this was a very prevalent, prolific view that was being promoted by certain individuals. And it was like they were saying, oh, radicalization theory is predicated on the belief of a conveyor belt theory of radicalization, that people go from this, they go to this, and then they go to that. And I was like, conveyor belt theory of radicalization. Never heard of this in my life. I'm like, maybe this person read something that I didn't read. And I spent so much time trying to find this conveyor belt of radical. There's no theory. There's no such theory of conveyor belt theory. So why did this person even come up with that, right? And then you get people who are anti-state, right? I mean, full disclosure, I'm definitely a statist in many ways. Um, and they don't like the state and they push back against anything the state does. So if the state wants to do anything against extremists or terrorists, they don't like it. They're against it. They oppose it, they castigate it, they criticize it, they write articles against it, right? And I think that comes from a very hyper liberal perspective of where like they just want unfettered freedom to do whatever, right? Muslim guys are committing terrorism and they're plotting terrorist attacks, this and that. No, 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 no. You should not send in undercovers to try to discover their plots because that's blah, 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 right? They'll come up with some reason. So there are people who do that. Unfortunately, I mean, it's a free society. They have the opinions to write whatever they want in journal articles, but you have to be cautious. You have to be careful. And I would encourage people who are in this space who don't have the luxury of sitting back and thinking, I'm going to write an article about this topic, and I'll leave it at this. I was mocking some of the academics once in the ISIS days, and I would pick silly topics like why ISIS, was it picking your nose with your left finger and not your right finger, you know? And I made this very flowery title, which, it was obviously to mock people. So it just shows how easily people can come up with whatever article they want. So for those professionals who are in this space, just be cautious of who you're taking your information from.
Yeah, that's why I'm really concerned about the field of counterterrorism studies because a lot of it, by definition, relies very much on academic content, and so I'm not sure how the students going in, especially in early stages, they may not have the frame of reference to understand that what they need to be looking at has to be taken with a grain of salt. So
Yeah, I'll give you another quick example. Because I am interested, my function at that time, the way that I saw myself was to fight ISIS. So think about a fire, right? A house is on fire. The firefighter goes and tries to fight the fire, put the fire out. The academic is the one watching the fire and thinking, I wonder how hot this fire is. I wonder what the rate of spread of this fire is. Like, there's a fire. Put the fire out. That's the only thing you should be interested in. But so when the ISIS thing happened, I'm debating with ISIS guys. I'm, trying to track them. I'm trying to find them. And you have these academics who are interviewing them because everybody wanted to get the interview from the ISIS fighter, right? And I'm thinking to myself, they're just uncritically, blindly regurgitating what ISIS is telling them. And you're giving them a platform. So when they tell you, oh, we joined ISIS for these reasons, and now everyone is writing articles and books on why ISIS joined, and then people who read those articles and books think this is why they joined. You see what you've done there. You have done the job of the terrorists. That's it, So very uncritical, very, I think in some cases sloppy work that people were doing. And like you cannot believe these people, you know what I mean? You have to really bring to bear a very critical lens, right? Like when they're telling you they're attributing their reasons. We had a Canadian guy, a very famous guy, he was talking about, I had a great life. I made, thousands of dollars. He was a janitor. Okay. I had a great life. I was living as a janitor. I went fishing. I went hunting. I came to the Islamic State, and to start a new society and blah, 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 and this and that. And I was like, come on. I mean, come on, okay? Like people, that's not why people you're not living a great life. Like you're probably making 2,000 bucks a month. Like you can barely live off of that kind of money. You definitely can't have a family and live with that kind of money. So they portray themselves as very altruistic, very sincere, very pure. And that was the whole ploy and plot is to depict their reasons as being very righteous. So yeah, you have to be very careful of the information that they produce.
That kind of leads me to ask kind of a broader question. Do you believe that the current city architecture, even in the practitioner sense, is agile enough to respond to hybridized threats that include traditional terrorism, cyber warfare, and also now increasingly state-directed influence operations? Because what I find is a lot of this counterterrorism, theory, even in practice, is often gets stuck on one thing and then just keeps going with it no matter what else happens.
I'll give you a perfect example of this. I wrote an article, or I contributed to a chapter of a textbook talking about de-radicalization programs.
Hmm.
By the time it was published, all of the information was obsolete and out of date. All of
Wow.
it. So it does not have the ability to be agile. The editing processes, and this is something that, of course, academics rightfully complain about, the time it takes from the time of writing your article to the time it gets published, way too long. Things have changed, information is now obsolete. And think about the cascading effect of that, that it takes 2 years for it to get into print. The information is out of date. A year later, somebody reads that information and then cites it and talks about it as if it's real, as if it's up to date, and it's not. So there are some, I mean, organizations like it, I think it comes down to the traditional method of publishing and this and that is forget it. It's gonna get eaten by time. But if organizations and like you have universities or others that directly publish, they might have online journals or other
Mhm.
publications, which the turnaround time is pretty quick. Though
Mhm.
those are the ones that will succeed and actually have a positive contribution to the space because the information is up to date.
It's just that sometimes universities specifically, or even sort of academic counterterrorism organizations, don't even want to look at new ways of examining counterterrorism. For instance, just to give an example, I tried to bring up the topic of Russia's support for jihadist organizations and the increasingly combined model. Nobody wants to even discuss that. It's just taboo in those circles. They're
Why?
happy to
That's so strange.
they're happy to discuss Russia separately. They're happy to discuss jihadists separately. They're not
Uh,
happy. They don't want to discuss the two together because it breaks with the idea that Russia is a secular state that has designated Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization, and you know politically supports organizations like Hamas, but is not involved in, but has itself suffered from terrorism. This is basically
yeah, yeah, yeah.
the mainstream view right now.
Got it. I mean, that's just an example, another example, I guess, further evidence of the inability. I was saying earlier about it being imaginative, right? Being
Mhm.
creative in the surveillance side. you have to do it on the academic side too. Like use your imagination, not like made up stuff, but you have to look at these different angles, these different sides. Um, a perfect example, I mean, of that specific, reference about Russian support, Russian state support for jihadist organizations. I heard a reference to the ISIS cyber caliphate. People were talking about how ISIS was doing this and ISIS was doing that, and obviously that person didn't have the most updated information because the cyber caliphate turned out to be a Russian psyop, right? The cyber caliphate is not ISIS.
Mm-hmm.
It's a Russian psyop, psychological operation. They traced the keyboards back to Cyrillic keyboards. There were different methodologies that were used to kind of attribute it to the Russians, but they were pretending that they were ISIS while they were doing it. How much of the ISIS that we understand in Iraq and Syria was actually coming from them? You certainly didn't see a lot of Russian operations against ISIS, Russian and Syrian Assad operations against ISIS. How many times did they try to attack Raqqa, their capital? Zero. And many times and all they did was they did their usual trolling, right? Of we killed Baghdadi, right? We've defeated the Islamic State. We did it, or we like taking credit for actions that they didn't take, you know.
Right.
So yeah, I guess it's just another example of how some of these very formalized organizations they're not able to be as agile and as imaginative.
So here's a question more geared towards the actual terrorist organization. How has the erosion of clear command structures within terrorist organization altered the counterterrorism targeting paradigm? And has it actually altered it?
Yeah, that's pretty standard actually, because we're used to these hierarchical organizations, especially when we're trying to compare with other organizations that, the West may have dealt with, whether they're like guerrilla armies, right? Things like that. Um, and they're very used to and conditioned to expecting this, top-down hierarchical approach.
Mhm.
And in many respects, because it's a militancy, right? And militant organizations, you have to have a chain of command, right? That's part of it. But as these groups have also realized that actually, if you have these autonomous cells, that all they need is the general programming. They don't need, even the leadership understands, we don't need to give you specific details on buy this and buy it from there and go to this person. The organization already knows that you're active in that space. You have the contacts already. So the general thing, when they say kill the infidels wherever you find them, okay, message received. How, okay, and then you discuss it with the local group. How do you want to do it? Do you want to, you want to shoot people? You want to drive them over? Do you want to make a bomb attack? Is it too complicated? What's easier to get? What do we already have? Some
Mhm.
cells will have more access to items and information than other cells will, right? So, and you'll see a more complex attack in that case, right? Whereas you'll see a simple attack in that case. So it does affect the targeting paradigm because obviously, in a hierarchical organization, you can go from one guy to the next guy to the next guy, just go down the line and start taking everybody out, right? But then when it breaks off and goes to this autonomous cell, which is not communicating regularly with anybody else in that leadership structure, you better find that guy who's the contact person to that cell. Otherwise, you're never going to find that cell. And then, even if you do find that, how are you going to find the cell? Because as we know, some of the guys don't even know who each other are. And if anything, what the successes have shown in targeting other groups, this and that, they realize that we need to be even more strict on that. We don't communicate with each other. We, stick to our protocols, and they're going to keep trying to do that. The thing is that they will always run the risk of infiltration and surveillance. because we know what to look for, right? When guys are out there, and we had one case here where two guys they wanted to do a bomb attack on a train that was going into the U.S. And one of the things that stood out when they came in, because if you think about where people look when they go into a train station or bus station, right? These guys came in and you could see them coming in and they would look right where the security camera was. And one of them was stupid enough to say he would, poke the guy in the shoulder and pointed at the security camera. So and a guard looking at that camera is going to be like, wait a second, why? Who does that? Let's keep watching these guys. Then they go over and they're looking up and around to see where are the security cameras. They're not looking at anything else. So that it's obvious that these guys are doing surveillance on a target, right? So little things like that is how they will continue to get caught, right?
Mhm.
But as they retain their secrecy and they think they're using new apps and creating apps for themselves, it's I don't know if it's going to get more difficult or easier. Remains to be seen.
Yeah, it's certainly a good question. Hmm. So, what is your assessment of how well intelligence services have adapted to ideologically ambiguous actors? Those who are, violent, but they're not necessarily aligned with any specific group.
Yeah, they that becomes more difficult because if you're, for example, looking for Islamists, you're going to go to Islamist forums, right? You're going
Yeah.
to link the ideology. But people who are not, they're not in those forums, right? So how are you going
Hmm.
to link them? How are you going to find them? Are they in any forums at all, even?
Hmm.
Right? Are they in multiple forums? Like, so you do get some people who are, not as sophisticated, right? And they're like on multiple platforms and they talk too much, and they get caught, right? Because they say things online, and you have uh you have these undercovers that are in a lot of these groups. I'm sure you're gonna see if it's not already being done, I would be surprised if it is AI chatbots, which are members, quote unquote, of the chat group, right? That sometimes talk to each other and make, and not recruit each other, but like preach to the choir, basically. And then other people might see this and think, oh, yeah, I believe that too. I want to engage with this person. They just said exactly what I think, right? I would do this. I would do this when I would come into one of those jihadist, so-called jihadist rooms, and I would have like three accounts or four accounts or whatever it was, and I would have one talk to the other, and I'm talking to myself, and I would even have a debate with me, you know what I mean, about this, that, and then somebody would message me, brother, mashallah, you did very good in that debate with that person. Oh, now I got you, right? So things like that, there are tactics that can be used where, you know, so back to this your question directly, very difficult, right? Like they are intent on committing violence, and for whatever reason, maybe they had a bad life, they were traumatized when they were a kid, take your pick, right? There's many things that make a person go off. But now that they're not ascribing to any one particular ideology, it becomes much, much more difficult to identify them unless there's some leakage of some kind. They've said something or something was, observed or recorded or whatever, and then somebody reports that. That's why see something, say something is such
Sure.
an important thing. But, what are you going to call it now? Hear something, say something?
Hmm.
Right? So we had a case right now in Canada where in Montreal, the guy, he was, previously convicted in the US for a terrorism related offense, and he was in a homeless shelter, and said he spoke to somebody in the homeless shelter, and he said something about he had some ideation about committing violent attacks. Right away got reported to the RCMP, and he got picked up, he got arrested, and that's the best way to catch those people, but otherwise it's difficult.
What comes to mind with the Christchurch killer in New Zealand? Obviously, the attack turned out to be anti-Muslim, but that was the end result that you know. Had he been intercepted earlier on, people might not have known necessarily that he was going to target Muslims because nothing about his background specifically pointed to that particular target, but it did uh, point to violence and training and having links to assorted different extreme groups and regimes.
Yeah, you get these people who are, very malevolent minded, and uh, they're hell bent on killing somebody, killing people, right? And they just need an excuse, right? Like
Hmm.
they're primed f to commit some kind of act, but we don't know where that act is going to be. Uh, and yeah, it's I don't know, I haven't done the, I haven't done a deep dive on that guy, but I see this even like in the American context where you have people who are like you know, for example, at the time of this recording, the riots that are happening in Los Angeles, right, against
Hmm.
immigration, customs enforcement, and all that, and I see people who are like pro Trump administration who are like, kill these people. I got guns. I'm getting gun. I'm loading up. I'm this. I'm that. And like they're primed, right? And it's like, and it's very easy. They're like, you should just kill these people. You should just kill these people. And whether it's the rioters, or if it's today, it's the rioters, tomorrow it could be. And then I was just following some accounts and then I stopped following them because they're crazy. But it's like I see this attitude and these comments on other related issues as well. You know what I mean? Anything that like rage farming, the whole
Hmm.
idea of promoting rage and making people get more and more angry, depict an existential threat to your way of life, to your community, your culture, your people,
So
your
that
race, your religion.
so that
You
itself
will,
is a psychological operation for sure.
yeah.
That
So,
depend. It may come from foreign actors, it may come from domestic actors, but it definitely,
mhm.
is a
Or, or
social
foreign
engineering.
actors who are pretending to be domestic actors.
There's as well, yeah. In your view, what is the most overlooked emerging counterterrorism threat the public and or policymakers are failing to recognize?
The most emergent threat. I would say, well, right now it's anti-Semitism,
Hmm.
anti-Semitic terrorism, because like, all the things that we've been saying, right? Remember I said about how easy it is, or how people have made it so easy to kill others, the dehumanization of others, right?
Hmm.
So like, that right now it's like Zionist is the bad word. Meanwhile, it's like, well, yeah, Zionism is just like one of the political ideologies found within Judaism. It's
Hmm.
not really like that special or that unique, but it's been made special and unique. Well, he's a Zionist, right? Like, and that's the worst thing you can be because that's the caricature that's been created of the Zionist, right? So the guy can be a Jew. I'm not against Jews, but I don't like Zionists, right? So
Hmm.
you can make it very exclusive, right? That term, and it's a triggering word now. It's a word that forces you to take action, right? So you have to kill the Zionists. You have to burn them. That's the idea. That's the thinking that they promote with this. So it's the same way in which whether it's, Zionists today and who knows who it's going to be tomorrow or Muslims or whomever, you can just take that word out and replace it with something else and the mechanism will be the same, right? The mechanism is the same, so the result will be the same. So I would say right now is the most emergent threat, but the more I would say a little bit of like an in more insidious one is these malevolent actors encouraging young kids to kill themselves and harm themselves and harm others. And why I say that's the more insidious one is because it's deliberately targeting children to commit acts against other children, like 764 and all these others, nine Order of the Nine Angles, and that's the thing. It's like, and why again is because most parents have no clue what their kids are watching online and consuming online. And unfortunately, where you have kids have a lot of, like nowadays in especially in the West, for whatever reason, whether it's the internet is making us crazy or making us more anxious or making us more depressed, there's a lot of anxiety and depression among young kids. And sometimes it's, the parents are not doing their job as parents, right? Loving their kids and being present for their kids and supporting their kids. And so the kids' new family is online. That's why they end up doing what some seemingly random stranger on the internet is telling them to do. They're not going to listen to their parents if to do whatever, but they'll listen to, Axe Head 135, a handle name. So that's what bothers me. And for those parents who are listening, like you don't wait until it happens to you, right? It's happening like, coming back to what I was saying earlier about our work at Parents for Peace. Um, we see this that the parents are not active in the home, and in some cases, the parents are the problem even, and the kid becomes like he's not loved, you know what I mean? And then now you're consuming stuff which is just hatred and self-hatred, right? You're nothing, you're useless, you're worthless. Your life is not even worth it. Go and kill yourself. Go kill somebody and then kill yourself because your life's not. So there are people out there deliberately seeking out troubled youth so that they can do that. How do you fight that? If you're not even aware of it, especially as parents, like if you're not even aware what your kid is doing, how is your kid feeling? What are you doing to help so I think that's a big problem as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of emphasis on banning phones or getting kids off social media, but I think
That's not going to
trying
work.
to ban things, first of all, what will work about as well as the prohibition did back in the 1920s.
Exactly.
But the other way, there isn't a conversation about positive engagement, about getting kids involved in interesting things, meaningful things early in life, so that they develop the sense of connection. They don't need to go and spend all the time listening, to garbage online. Like I
You
don't, I
know,
don't see that being really pushed anywhere.
I was even thinking, somebody was saying kids these days are always on their phones and this and that and blah blah blah. And I was like, yeah, they're watching us because
Hmm.
that's what we're doing. And what if we're talking about kids getting radicalized that way? You don't think the adults are getting radicalized in the exact same way because we're consuming the exact same material as well, right? So adults and parents and whatever, like we have to remind ourselves that when we're talking to our kids about what they're doing, what they shouldn't be doing, what are we doing? What are we signaling to them? Now, sometimes you can say to them, look, and when you're an adult, you can do this. There are things that adults do that kids can't do. You can
Hmm.
try those kinds of arguments, right? But I think the best way is to have a meaningful connection with your kids, right?
Hmm.
However way you can do that, right? Just find a way, even if it's like a little bit of time, whether it's a half hour or 15 minutes, even whatever, and teach them to expect that there's a lot of crap online. You don't know
Hmm.
what to believe.
Sure.
Definitely don't, post pictures of yourself or things like that.
Hmm.
Tell them exactly what people will do with their photos,
Hmm.
right? Like you're going to end up in a deep fake porn video, right? And
Hmm.
which is going to get shared and everybody's going to think you did that. Or they'll
Hmm.
blackmail you or your parents or whatever. So let them know what the threats are out there. That's what I do with my kids and my family.
Hmm.
I let them know like this is what people do. These are the kinds of people that are out there.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, be honest. Honesty is the best policy, and frankly, inoculation works.
yes.
Being prepared, mentally prepared about the type of threat or the type of issue. Um, So I wanted to kind of ask you, and this one specifically focusing on the Western counterterrorism community. Would you say that it's overly focused on kinetic responses at the expense of pre-radicalization disruption or community engagement, or basically tackling the ideological underpinnings of terrorism?
Yeah, so this is like when people say, "Oh, we're engaged in a whack-a-mole approach," right, to
Mm-hmm.
this. So the whacking the mole, so the mole is that creature that,
Mm-hmm.
destroys the garden, right? So the people have kind of used this analogy. They've said that, taking out these, it's just like you're just doing a whack-a-mole approach. But I remind people, what happens if you don't whack the mole?
Mm-hmm.
They destroy your garden. That's
Sure.
what happens. So you have to continue whacking the moles. You have to continue with kinetic strikes.
Sure.
Like obviously you cannot take that off the table. The question is that what is the role that what role can the state play? Because that same state who's engaged in kinetic operations, what mandates do they even have to commit other activities, right? So the countering the ideology and things like that. Like who should do that? Who in the government's going to do that? Now, I know this, quite well because I was assisting some of them in trying to do some of that. But what ended up happening was they were like, well, we're the government. We don't talk about religion. So we can't do that. We can't talk about religion. So that's one hand tied behind your back,
Mm-hmm.
right off the bat. Then when you're talking about, pre-radicalization and prevention efforts, and who should do that? It's definitely not going to be the military
Sure.
because the military is seen as, they break things. So who are the, levers, what are the levers in government that can be brought to bear that can do that level of prevention work? Now, I don't even think government should be the ones to do it. I think NGOs should be the ones to do it. Those who are not connected to government. Because if
Mm-hmm.
it's government doing it, they're inextricably linked to the kinetic actions that are happening, right? So it's like, so then of course the people would say, well, how can you come here being a prevention thing? Not realizing that, government is a complex, organism. It
Sure.
has different, different abilities and different departments that do different things simultaneously, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and when people say, why are we giving money to foreign aid, when we can be fixing roads and bridges at home? It's like, well, those are two different things that governments do, right? Like the federal government might do foreign aid, but it's like the municipal or state government that's going to do the roads and bridges. Like you're confusing the two, right? Different levels of government. I'm sure there's going to be federal infrastructure funding and all of that. And so there's some overlap. But, so in that prevention space, it should be NGOs who are arm's length from government so that they don't have to answer for the kinetic stuff that the government is doing. That is what the government is better at. The kinetic stuff, the surveillance, the police, the this, the that. Not so much the soft end of
Sure.
the spectrum, right? So
Mm-hmm.
so that's what I would suggest. I would suggest get NGOs to do that prevention stuff because they are going to be the ones to be able to reach out to community groups and other groups without any political shadow overhanging, you know. Because if you're like trying to get a religious group or a church group or whatever group, and it's a government thing, well, only the ones that support your government are going to be the ones that come out to do that. And are they even representative of the actual community? That's the question. So,
Also a good point. So, kind of transitioning into a slightly different direction, I wanted to talk a little bit about the so-called lone wolves. So I call them so-called because many of them are not really lone wolves, and I'll get to what I mean momentarily. But assuming there are lone wolves, individuals who are self-radicalized and acting entirely in individual capacity with no um, outside infrastructure, how what distinguishes today's lone actors that are from those seen 15 or 20 years ago beyond their operational autonomy?
wow, good question. Okay, even the lone wolf
Mm-hmm.
came from a pack. Right? The wolf is not born by itself.
Mm-hmm.
They're born in a pack and they grow up in a pack. And if it does go off by itself, okay, fine, right? So that's the lone wolf analogy. So if we apply it here, then that individual who is the quote unquote lone wolf or lone actor, they have similarly emerged from an environment, right? They've emerged from a community. They didn't just wake up one day and decide, hey, I'm going to go and do this thing, right? They've been conditioned, they've been, whatever, recruited or whatever it is, they've come out of this community, this environment. Okay. So that's my yeah, we see them as lone actors, meaning they've gone and done something on their own. They didn't take direct direction, but they took passive direction from somewhere, right? They've
Mm-hmm.
taken it from somewhere, right? Whether it's the grievances or maybe even ideology in passing. It's
Mm-hmm.
not even that they subscribe to an ideology, it's that they've come across an ideology and basically said, yeah, I agree with that, but they don't really continue with engaging with it. So like a neo-Nazi, let's say, or somebody who did it on that, or Islamist, whatever, right? It's not like they continue to be Islamist or neo-Nazi. They agree on that one thing and and then they leave it and in their subconscious they've already checked that box of like violence is okay, right? And they can justify it using whatever they need to. So they don't need a jihadist or a neo-Nazi to tell them, hey, you go and you do that. They already decided that they're gonna do that, right? They're gonna do something, and they can they can they can fake it if they want and say that, yeah, I heard this guy talking, and I really his speech really resonated with me, and that's why I did it, right? Uh, Um, so, so that's the lone actor. They come from an environment. They come from, they've been influenced indirectly, passively. What distinguishes them, like modern ones, from really, I think, is the the anonymity of the internet is the big thing because in those days, um, you couldn't be anonymous.
Sure.
People could see you,
Mm-hmm.
right? They can say, "Hey, I saw this guy. He was, at this time, and he looked suspicious at the time, but I didn't think anything of it." But online, you could have a AI generated photo these days, and nobody's gonna know. I mean, you could put a photo like you're from, I don't know, China. Okay. You're from wherever, like so completely different from what you are. And you're seeing these videos now, right? This video is not real. I'm not real. I'm AI, right? Like they
Yep.
are getting really good. They're getting
Good.
really good. And so think about what you can do. I can tell you, I know terrorists and other nefarious, malevolent, evil actors, evil people, they're already looking at it to see how they can use it for evil,
Of course.
right? That's what people do. Like a guy will look at a knife and he'll say, "Oh, I can cut my food with this knife." And the other one will look at the knife and say, "Hey, I could stab that guy and take his food so that I can eat." Why not?
So the reason why I said I'm very skeptical about this whole lone wolf phenomenon is because a lot of these people seem to have some sort of connection to the outside world. Just because they're acting independently doesn't mean that they are actually independent. There may be greater forces
Yeah,
at play that may be manipulating and pushing these individuals in a subtle way to commit acts. And some of it could be coordinated at the above, not because they know that they're being manipulated, but because
right.
whoever is manipulating them. Just to give you an example of something that has really bothered me, remember the New Orleans attack? And then there was another attack in Las Vegas, and neither of them was ever fully 100%
Hmm.
resolved. So it just kind of died, and it
Yeah,
seemed to me that there were just too many different things that spoke to the fact of some sort of coordination by somebody somewhere with something. And, in the case of the New Orleans guy, he was obviously radicalized and not just online. But in the case of the Las Vegas situation, that just kind of this whole investigation, I don't even know what happened. But, you
yeah,
know, in those cases, it's not that they were really necessarily lone wolves, it's that there seems to be a convenience factor to not looking beyond these individuals, just arresting whoever for whatever, you can pin to them, and then not looking any further because, it takes resources, it takes time, and may
yeah.
not be, and then an ultimate outcome may not be satisfying to what people want to see.
Yeah, it's interesting you said that. I was just talking about this earlier today. So the news cycle, right? The news cycle, it's up there for a bit, for a few days, and that's it. Because something else happened. You know what I mean? And the
Yeah.
media, of course, that especially like media that slavishly follows every little thing that happens in politics.
Hmm.
Well, I mean, especially nowadays, there's something happening like every few minutes. So how do
Especially
you
with some
even?
people who really like media attention.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but it just goes to show that media is set up that way so that there's just like it's like jolts per moment, right? Media companies, media organizations, and activists and independents and everybody in the space, everybody trying to get the story out, right? Um, and while this is happening, you have malevolent actors putting out disinformation or misinformation, whatever it is that they choose to poison the well with, right? So it's like a circus, right? That all this stuff is, and we're trying to make sense of things. So Las Vegas, New Orleans attacker, for example, um, yeah, look how quickly that came and went, right? I mean, the guy's, he's like how quickly it came and went, or a number of other attacks, right? So right now, with the attack that happened in Boulder, Colorado, with the firebombing of the people who were walking for the hostages, now they're starting to look like, okay, they have him in custody, he's alive, so we're gonna find out a lot more. But you're right, it does take time, and in a society where we're conditioned to just get it now, click the button, give me the news right now. I want people, they're incapable of holding judgment, reserving judgment, not having an opinion, and saying, hold on, or even saying, well, we have this basic opinion, but understand that there's always more than meets the eye. People can't even do that. They have a complete inability, like a pathological inability to do it. So, and that's why, and I think by extension, I mean, I hope it doesn't mean that we get lazy or intelligence agencies or law enforcement. I hope they don't get lazy that, oh yeah, we got him on X charge, attempted murder, this, that, blah, blah, blah. I don't care where he got his money from because we got him. He's going to be found guilty. We're going to lock him up and throw away the key, and that's it. Out of sight, out of mind. And then we'll be on to the next attack, right? So,
I'm struggling because there seems to be a perception that some people are radicalized almost entirely online. Assuming such people exist, how
mhm.
would people even know that that's true? How would they know that the person is radicalized online as opposed to somewhere else? Let's say that person's family is not religious, fine, maybe it's not the family, but how do you, unless you track every single step with that person's outside life, how would you know that he or she did not encounter some influence in person in some public square or private group, private, clique, on campus or at their workplace or wherever, community support, how do they come up with the assumption that there is this specialized process whereby some people just sit online all day and get radicalized as opposed to combine different elements of the process?
So, yeah, an easy way to look at this is to never assume anything and expect
Mhm,
everything.
mhm,
Don't assume anything, but expect everything. So, I wrestled with this a bit as well because it's like, what does online radicalization mean exactly? What, that person was not radicalized, they got online and they got radicalized?
mhm.
I can see how that can happen.
Sure.
Absolutely. Right? Absolutely. I gave you an example where I dealt with where
Mhm,
we were in the group, the terrorist group, and these guys were creating CDs for dissemination in the Muslim community. And it was basically a stitch job of videos of Muslims suffering all over the world.
mhm,
He gave it to one of the guys that we were trying to recruit as a recruiting gift. And he went home and he watched it with his mother. And at the end of it, his mother was in tears and said, son, whatever this group is doing to stop this, join them. And this guy never had any kinds of conversations like that with his mother. So you can imagine, and this is happening now, especially now in this day and age with where you cannot deny well, especially in this day and age, a hyper information age, where you're seeing all this stuff, which would radicalize anybody.
Mm-hmm.
When you're seeing kids being blown up and you're seeing those images, it's gonna affect you. It's gonna affect you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Without a doubt. Um, but you're also right about, I mean, again, expecting everything because yes, you're gonna get everything along that spectrum. You're gonna get the guy who was, he's radicalized. Actually, his radicalization started at school because he or she was being bullied. That's where it started, okay? It's nothing they saw online or this and that. It was a personal experience that they had, a
Mm-hmm.
personal grievance, a personal offense that they got, and they radicalized, right? Um, or it could be through what do we call it? Like personal presence, right? So you're
Mm-hmm.
not reading websites or watching videos. You're talking and chilling with friends or
Mm-hmm.
others who are talking about this stuff, and it takes a more cognitive, it's more intellectual. It has everything. It's got the group involved. There's emotional appeals, right? So you're right. So it could be that, right? So yeah, when they say online radicalization, I'm starting to accept that, yeah, it is a thing. It is a thing, meaning somebody who was not radicalized, they don't know anything because let's say they live in a rural area, they're going to a fully white school, nobody bullies them, their parents love them, okay, everything is great, or maybe their parents don't love them, right? And that's the trigger to push them into some kind of anger or hate
Mm-hmm.
movement, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then they go online and they see all this stuff, and then they're like, okay, I'm gonna go and do this. You know what I mean? Yeah, I agree with this, right? But whatever, they don't have friends, they're not having any engagement, right? They go on, they find themselves onto this platform or whatever platform. Suddenly they got friends. Suddenly, and that's that process of radicalization happening in real time online.
So radicalization, just like the opposite, counter extremism, counter terrorism, has become a very much transnational, trans-border process. And of course, international cooperation has become more important than ever, given the global implications of this, of transient ideologies that are being transmitted through social media, through international networks, through globalized communications. But at the same time, we're seeing this tendency towards isolationism and towards, you know, also just also normal internal struggles, countries trying to separate cooperation and information sharing from their own internal agendas and objectives and protecting their own security methods and so forth. So in terms of US security cooperation, especially counterterrorism, how would you describe the current situation, especially given this whole thing with Trump and not only his rhetoric about Canada, but also the steps he's taken to change the intelligence community and the approach to intelligence sharing?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a watershed moment for the West
Hmm.
because of that situation. How quickly and how easily these relationships can be poisoned and um, fall out of favor, I guess, and fall out of practice. So, like Five Eyes and NATO and all the usual standard
Hmm.
organizations, it's all under threat. It's all being changed, right?
We've
Even
taken a lot
domestically.
of that for granted, by the way.
Oh yeah.
Nobody thinks about Five Eyes on the daily basis, or at least most normal people don't. But until it falls apart and you don't have the access to that immediate intelligence sharing.
Yep.
Hmm.
Yep. Yeah. And so because we're not normal people, we think about this stuff all the time, right? We're
Sadly.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean it's taken it's it's a there's a lot of turbulence basically right now. And it's throwing people, it's making them confused. They don't know what to think. Others have become so offended at what they've been hearing and seeing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Especially Europe, vis-a-vis what was said about Europe on this side. So things in the US are changing significantly.
Mm-hmm.
I think a core ability will still remain.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the core ability will still remain, but the free flow of information is not going to be as free flowing as it used to be, which was, remember the whole thing with 9/11, right? They were saying that
Sure.
between the CIA and the FBI, there wasn't good communication. And then they created DHS to get rid of that and to kind of collect all
Mm-hmm.
the intelligence in one spot. What's going to happen now? What's going to happen now with, um, you know, um, state and federal relations, where the state doesn't want to do something, but the feds do. And, like example in LA, they didn't want to send, the governor did not want to send the National Guard, but then the feds sent the National Guard. Okay. So now you have conflict and clash, even before you had competition, right, with agencies and whatnot. Now you have clash. What happens then with information, right? So there is still, like, you have your fusion centers, state level fusion centers, they share information. And maybe at some level, like, the feds don't even need to be involved, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the states can handle it among themselves or clusters of states or whatever. But it is going to create a fracturing of the overall system. And, unfortunately, I mean, we can predict this right now. I mean, there's going to be a big attack, and we're going to have the same conversation all over again. How could
Mm-hmm.
this happen? Why wasn't there communication? Hey, but don't talk about politics. So, but what was the actual reason? But don't mention politics. And so we'll try to come up with some reason, which won't even be the real reason. And then
Mm-hmm.
it's just the cascading effect of that is just, it's disastrous for the public.
I mean, a lot of these security corporations are based on personal relationships. If profit professionals are being forced out of their jobs, how can that continuity actually happen on a practical operational
It
level?
can't. It cannot.
Mm-hmm.
It cannot. You lose the continuity. You lose that knowledge bank. You lose that wisdom that comes from years and years of experience, right? And
Mm-hmm.
this is the biggest. I think this is disastrous for the U.S. Like, I mean it when I say the word disaster, because it's just going to be so bad when things go wrong. When a big
Mm-hmm.
attack, when the big attack happens, it will just be, and they won't know because they've lost all that knowledge, institutional knowledge, and all of that. You're just going to bleed, is what's going to happen.
So, given the current state of things, given the fact that we are having transnational, bilateral, multilateral relations really undergoing a lot of strain, um, uh, how, what can, a lot of things are going to be changing. The usual kind of bureaucratic differences seem almost like small potatoes compared to these shifts in. Uh, What do you think is going to happen to the Five Eyes Alliance? What do you think is going to happen to intelligence sharing protocols? How resilient are these relationships on a grand scale?
These are good questions. I think, like I said, like, there will be a core function that will continue to remain. I mean,
Mhm.
they're not going to cut everything. That would be complete chaos. So at a general level, that will continue to occur. That resilience between the agencies, even though, yeah, at the political level, there might be some things being said at the practitioner level. And I'm having these conversations too. It's like nobody cares. They're just like, yeah, whatever. Yeah, it's this stuff being said, but they don't take it seriously. And the practitioners, especially the old heads, the guys who have been there, or people who have been there for a long time, for them, they don't care. They've seen governments come and go. I mean, it's only a 4-year term. What about after the term? Like, what's going to be the
Sure.
situation? So they're just kind of they're going to just ride it out at that basic level. That we when an investigation or an attack has progressed further on the spectrum and is closer to violence, that's where you're going to see a lot of the communication and information sharing. But before that, it's going to all get missed. All the stuff leading up to that is going to get missed, I think. Because what's the point? Why would you want to share it with a foreign nation? There's no threat related, right? There's no violence related threat to this. So that stuff will fall to society, right? And so you will just see more extremism in society, like not the violence part, that's the terrorism or the violent extremism, but the verbal stuff, the behavioral stuff, just
Mhm.
minus violence. That's the
Mhm.
extremism. And that will proliferate, as we have seen. It's proliferated considerably. And then when you talk about, far right networks and what are they going to do, they are obviously it's weird because on one hand it's like bring down the system and it's like, well, wait a second, now our guy got in, so like are we part of the system now? And but then what happens afterwards, right? It's going to be somebody else. So they're going to keep that mentality that they will have of, the existential threat to our race, our organizations,
Mhm.
our they're going to keep using that, right?
I mean,
And
I'm
keep
very tempted to say you are the existential threat. But I wanted to ask you something. There's been a lot of criticism of the Canadian counterterrorism approach on the political level, not necessarily the professionals doing the job, but the political approach to it. Basically, people are criticizing the excessively permissive environment, the
yes.
tendency to allow infiltration of radicals, unvetted, you know, com- groups and so forth. How accurate is that? And why do you think there hasn't been like a huge, massive attack at this of the sort that happened multiple times all over Europe, for instance?
Yeah. The reason for that is because Canada is still seen as a very sleepy country, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to make international news.
Mm.
It happens in Paris, if it happens in London, if it happens in Washington, D.C., New Orleans, like these are very, very well-known places. Even though
Sure.
Toronto is the fourth largest city in North America, right?
Mm-hmm.
People are going to recognize London and Paris and others before they recognize Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
So Canada is seen as, it's not really that big of a country. Like the vast majority of our population lives within a few, miles, kilometers of the U.S. border, right? I mean, our population is what, 50 million?
Mm-hmm.
That's like a drop in the bucket, right? For these other countries, right? So those are the reasons why I don't think we're seen as that important, right? We're not seen as like people are not going to say, oh no, you know what I mean? Like the Canadians, right? Like, plus, we don't have a colonial history either. Like we are the colony of Britain, right? We're not like the US. We're not like France, the UK. Like we don't have that history. So that's another reason I think. And so that's the reason why we haven't had, I think, a real big attack. But yes, I do feel that Canada is a little too soft when it comes to some of these things. And it's like it's just, like for example, let me start with back in the day when the Proud Boys Canada were designated as a terrorist organization in Canada. Everybody was like, "What? The who? Proud Boys in Canada?" At the time, politically, what was happening in the US with the Proud Boys. So in the Canadian side, I don't know why, to show their constituency or their voters that, hey, guys, we're doing something about this too. But capitalizing and piggybacking off of the political situation in the US, they designated as a terrorist organization Proud Boys Canada. And it was like everybody was like, wait, who? Proud Boys Canada. Everyone was like, we have a Proud Boys Canada. Like they have never done anything violent in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
Zero. There are no instances, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, other than like being like jerks, they went to I think there was one instance, there was like a indigenous ceremony or something, and these three white idiots, they were saying something, whatever. but that's it, right? And then that's not terrorism. So why designate them? Like, what's the point of that, right? And then if you're going to designate an organization, why would you then not arrest its members? So a Samidun, for example, which is a, so-called pro-Palestinian leftist, new left, they were designated as a terrorist group, right? Well, how come the founder and the person is still out there talking? Why haven't you arrested her on terrorism charges? You
Sure,
have
good question. I assumed they would be, but then nothing happened then.
they don't do it. They don't do it. I don't know what the problem is in Canada and the mindset here. It bothers me a lot. I was really triggered by the whole ISIS conversations. Remember the whole we got to bring them back. We have to bring everybody back. Prosecute them in their own countries if blah blah blah, and like the kind of cliche statements and slogans that people were saying. And it's like I don't understand. Like, how is this so difficult? It's like participation in terrorist activity is a criminal offense. It's in the criminal code. Travel for the purposes of terrorism is a criminal offense. It's like open and shut. It's very straightforward. Well, we don't know if we can really this, that. And I'm like, I'm confused. Like, why, even you had these, and you had these women who were basically using their kids as hostages, is the term that I would use to say, oh, look at my kid. They need medical assistance. How monstrous of you Western country that you're not bringing them back right away, as if we were supposed to be a taxi service for these people who renounced and denounced their country, Canada, went over there, said all this stuff while they thought they were going to win, and then oh no, suddenly they lost and I have a right to come back and you're evil because you didn't come and pick me up right away and bring me home. Like the idealism, the naivete, the arrogance bothers me. Okay? And then what starts to happen is then you have like liberal types who start to attack their own country and try to shame their countries into repatriating ISIS members because oh they have kids and they have this and they have that. It's like hold on a second. There's no, you think that's we were our job was supposed to swoop in and rescue these people now from a situation they put themselves in? No, does not work like that. And so what happened is even those that did come back, did they charge them with terrorism? A very few number they charge with terrorism. The rest of them they put on what they call peace bonds. Peace bond is like enhanced probation. There's no incarceration. You're on a probation for 5 years or whatever it is. That's
So basically, so
ridiculous.
you have terrorist members, terrorists who are basically walking around and doing who knows what.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, and what bothers me the most is that and ISIS members said this to each other. They said, look at Allah is on our side because these kuffar, they can't even charge us. They
Wow.
said we were doing all this and that. Look at us. Allah's protecting us. And we look like idiots. We think in the West, people, they think they're smart. They think they are, oh, by our magnanimous conduct and our good manners, and we will show them that we are better and we are good, and they will like us because of that. Are you stupid? Like this tells me that these are people who do not have experience in these communities. It's a very dangerously naive worldview, right? And that's how they are able to come and infiltrate and run their influence operations in their communities and take over mosques and Muslim organizations. This is how they do it because you let them. And now that, there's all this talk about banning the Muslim Brotherhood, and oh, now you realize that the Muslim Brotherhood is a fifth columnist, insidious infiltration organization. They wrote about it, they put it in writing in the 1990s, and they said, we're going to take the long view. Oh, and now it's 2025, and now you see the fruits of their labor.
With the
So,
methods that they use are nothing new. They're basically
yeah, yeah,
copying the communist march through the
yes,
institutions identically. There's a
yes.
reason for that, by the way.
Yep,
So
yep.
So all of that is nothing new. None of it is new. It's basically a carbon copy of other similar movements and organizations. And I don't know why people don't see that. But what really bothers me is that, okay, you have these radicals, these terrorists, they come back or, they never left and they were never charged with anything. They raise their kids. How are they going to raise their kids? Like radicals, right? So up until, eventually the kids, as adults will have to make a choice whether they want to stick with it or, form their own life. But presumably, there's going to be a great deal of influence from the family while they're raising them, and they will obviously be opposed to any sort of external intervention. They're not going to be cooperative. They're not going to be the ones calling people like you and asking them to intervene because they want them to be raised that way with that mentality, presumably. So, what do we do about it now? Where does this right to parent start? How do you balance this right to parent and with
I
the
know.
with the with the idea of not raising radicals a fifth column in the middle of your country?
Yeah, this is like I remember, thinking we revoke custody in like drug cases where the parents
Sure.
are addicted to drugs and are
Mm-hmm.
violent felons or this and that. So why would we not do that for ISIS members?
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you do that, now you're further radicalizing the young kid that you brought them back, you took them away from their parents. So it's like catch 22, like you damned if you do and damned if you don't, right? Um, and then yeah, what can you do, right? So again, I'm going to come back to having these NGOs who are not
Mm-hmm.
connected to government to do the work and knowing, and we should know what kind of work the NGO does. We know what methodologies they use. We know what credentials they have. And we know what they're going to talk about, right? Where they're going to be very nice and develop rapport and, try to explain to them, that, hey, like now you're back, you have all these opportunities, abilities, and I'm sure they're going to say all those things, right? But the problem is that it's such a long-term process, to for a kid coming back from ISIS territory and with their parent who was, has been in custody in ISIS territory for 5 years, let's say. I mean, well, it's where are we 2025, so 20, it's only really been, well, no, it's been like 10 years, 2015, right? 2014 was the so-called caliphate. So it's been like 10 years at least, right? Can you ever fix somebody like that? Right? In some cases, yes, you can. In other cases, no, you can't. And unfortunately, you're only going to learn that the hard way. You're going to wait all that time and your rehabilitation efforts will have failed.
It's funny. There's got to be some red flags are there any measurable red flags which show that somebody is past the point of no return versus somebody who's is at least contemplating or struggling with the issues and hasn't fully formed their views or and plus then you have stories of people who did go down the path of extremism and then decided to go off of it and there is also a sub debate within that sphere about how many of those people are actually for real versus opportunists who are just trying to get money from various organizations and media and so forth.
Yeah, right, right. Um, yeah, so it's interesting because the person may sound like they're beyond the point of return, but
Yeah.
they're actually not, right?
Huh.
Because at that time, in that moment in their life, they may be completely 100% convinced of their ideology and they'll
Mm-hmm.
never change it. I used to think like this.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, no way. I said, you're gonna cut my neck first
Mm-hmm.
before you stop me in this.
Mm-hmm.
And then a few years later, I was like, maybe not. You know, I
Mm-hmm.
changed my mind. So it's very difficult to know who is really, really past the point. I mean, an easy way is like if a person's in a combat zone, you kinetic de-radicalization is what's required, right? It's 100% success rate, 0%
Mm-hmm.
recidivism,
Right.
right? But when it's not kinetic and it's on this side, it's impossible to know. You
Mm-hmm.
need to stay with this person for many years, And there's a whole problem with that. Like most of these NGOs that are doing it like that, you need a person who's going to be there for a long period of time. It's a long period of time that you need to be staying with these people and doing what you need to do, right? And then, like, and I mean, the formers world, right? I think you were referring to, like, I mean, I hope nobody thinks there's money in this space. Like, and that's definitely not the place to go if you're looking for money. In fact, I saw, back to the academics a little bit. In fact, I saw a lot of pushback from academics who were like, "Wow, these guys, they're not experts. They can't be experts. We are the experts because, we have the PhD and we did our thing in a lab and blah blah blah." And it's like, so we also, ran into that problem, right? So yeah, at the end of the day, like it's a very individualized process as to who's going to be the trusted intermediary in
Mm-hmm.
that particular case, right? It
Mm-hmm.
could be the person is going to be a family member. It could be an uncle with whom that person connected very well. Maybe, it was a teacher, that's not even Muslim, that the
Mm-hmm.
person really, in their memory, that's the memory they have of them. Maybe it's an imam, right? Maybe
Mm-hmm.
it's not an imam because they hate imams and they're like, imams are useless, right? Maybe it's a cop, a Muslim cop in the case of maybe it's not a cop. Maybe that's the last person you should bring, right? Like I've experienced this myself, right? Like a former undercover, who got people arrested, who like, why would you want to talk to me?
Sure.
How am I gonna help you? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Why do I want to help you even? Right? And so you have to take it case by case basis. You have to really have a good understanding of, like, do a proper intake interview and talk to the friends, talk to the family, and then discover in that who is going to be the better trusted intermediary. And that trusted intermediary is the person that is able to develop rapport with the individual and
Mm-hmm.
exercise influence with the individual. That's what a trusted intermediary is, as opposed to a subject matter expert. So you need both of them. You need subject matter SMEs and trusted intermediaries. And the SMEs are going to be the police, the teacher, the psychologist, the clinical person, the whatever, the person who is not doing the direct one-on-one, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the a collegial, informative, educational collaboration between the TI and the SME is how you develop an effective and functioning de-radicalization or counter-radicalization program.
We've seen that a lot of these programs in Europe have failed, probably because of not having those factors in place,
Yep.
or
Yep.
but that brings me back to the first what we started with, and now we've gone full circle. And now I'm bringing it back to the Taliban, and a lot of these young people who admire groups like the Taliban because they see simplicity, they see discipline, they see some, virtue, and the, to what extent do they actually understand what they're really signing up for? At what point does someone who just has these idealistic visions really understand what it is to advocate for and to actually fully immerse themselves in the lifestyle, in the ethics, in the worldview, and the impact that these types of people have?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think most people, the vast majority, know what they're getting into. They don't realize. I mean, we saw this with ISIS. It was a rude awakening for a lot of people. And that's why I do believe a lot of people when they say that, I went there and I realized, oh crap, this is not what I thought it was. And then they were never able to leave. They couldn't even say they wanted to leave, otherwise they'd be
Mm-hmm.
killed right then and there, right? And they had to accept the fact that they were stuck there now, right? So I think the vast majority don't know what they're getting into because unless you have lived like they live, those people over there, you're not gonna be able to do it, right? Like I've had exposure to that, so I know I can do that, right? But if you haven't lived like that, how are you possibly gonna, be able to do that? Now, let's say it depends on what kind of person you are. If you grew up in the West and, you have everything given to you and technology and this and that and flush toilets and proper drinking water and da da da. And yeah, go to Pakistan, go to Afghanistan and see now. Ain't no flush toilets, buddy. You know what I mean? And the water, oh God, help you. And the disease and the dirtiness and the smells and all those things, it will overwhelm you. Like if you're a prim and proper, grew up in the West, fairy princess, and you go over there, you're finished. It's gonna be a rude awakening. Now, some people adapt, right? They do adapt and they try it and they do it and they survive. They actually succeed,
Mm-hmm.
right? But few people, not many people are capable of doing that. Few people do it, and then they live their life thinking that this is what I'm supposed to do, right? And so that's the way that I would kind of describe the wake up call that some of them get. And this happened a lot with the ISIS. A lot of these guys realized these guys they're not nice. They think that, oh, we're Muslims, we love Islam and Muslims, and yes, yes, Islam, and we as long as you love Islam, then people will whatever. And it's like, no, no, you're gonna realize that these are awful people, awful, awful people.
I would put a lot of these college pro-Hamas activists in that category in
Oh
a
yeah,
person.
oh well, it's
Even
just
both the American ones and the foreigners, a lot of even the foreigners, I think, are very much just basically spoiled kids with no real understanding.
yeah,
So the
yeah.
question is,
Queer,
so
like queers for Palestine is
a lot
the
of these people have obviously not gone to Gaza or to Syria to wherever.
I saw on LinkedIn it was like some lady, like celebrating herself, about how great they did this for Palestine. It's the feminist movement or something something. And I was like, wow. I'm like, do you know what they think of feminists over there? Like you're the devil, basically. You're Satan's hand to pollute the minds of Muslim women. And
Is
I'm like, yeah. And
is
this is
is
like,
it
yeah.
is it
Go ahead.
possible to like give these people a wake up call to just like before some of them do cross the line and do something incredibly stupid? Like there was a story recently about a couple of idiots who went. One of them was Muslim, another one was Jewish. They went around firebombing targets in like in Philly, like in they attacked Chabad house and put
Mm,
graffiti and did some other crap, but they never traveled outside the country. They were
mm.
all like completely
Yeah,
American born
spoiled.
and
Yeah, they're
raised there.
spoiled brats. Yeah, this is
Yeah.
especially in these very liberal university college campuses, it's a bubble, right? They live in a bubble.
Yeah.
And I understand it. I understand like it sometimes in some of it has to be a bubble, right? For you to, and I get all of that, right? But the end result is a complete like departure from reality. Right. And again, it's because again, a lot of it is influenced by, it is leftist ideology, right? The resistance narratives, the revolution narratives, the bring down the system narratives, right? Like, do they think, okay, you bring down this system, what is your plan to replace it? What's the next day gonna look like? And you think it's what? Like, because we grew up in the society where it's, yep, click, make your post, make your video, post it, and that's it. And it happens. You think starting a new society is like a one-click type experience? Like it took centuries for places to become what they've become. And you want to bring this all down, you don't even know what you're going to replace it with, let alone how long it's going to take to do that. Never mind the fact that all of these rights that you have only exist in this current situation, this current context. So what are you going to do? Like, how are you going to enforce the completely devoid of reality? Like I said, the Queers for Palestine. It's like,
Is
what?
there, do you think it's possible to intervene these people? Remember, these guys are the ones who are going to be running for office. They're going to be the ones working for the media. They're the ones going
Uh-huh.
to be working for all these NGOs. And if these people with that type of mentality infiltrate, and as they already have soft power institutions and politics, what kind of leaders are we going to have in 20 years from now?
Yeah. I think many will mature out of it
I
as
mean, some
as is
maybe, but I
Yeah.
think a lot of these people have gotten so brainwashed. It's not just like, oh, I'm a, champagne communist or whatever from
Mhm.
20 years ago. These people are actually really hateful. A lot of them are,
Oh yeah.
so
Yeah, I
that's what
mean,
scares me. Not
yeah.
just the marchers and the drum beaters who go around sitting on encampments and shouting nonsense, but like the people who do cross the line, the people who are parts of organizations and associations and who are involved in the active recruitment and who show a fair degree of dedication to the cause.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think one part of it will mature out of it. One part will continue on with it,
Hmm.
and the smallest part will actually take violent action, right?
Hmm.
It's always a smaller portion that does that, but that ultimately ends up being the how the fewest will manifest it. I think we say the majority will just either stay with these ideas or I don't know which one is hard. It's impossible really at this stage to know because we're just using the basic things of like most radicalized people don't commit violence. So I wonder right now, those who are most of the people who are radicalized, are they just gonna stay radicalized, or are they just is it gonna wane and just become not as
But they can do
relevant and
damage
important?
But they can do damage in other ways. For example, you have a
Oh
number
yeah,
of doctors who claim they will not be providing medical services for people who are,
no,
age
they should be
Jewish or,
fired. They should
yeah.
be fired.
And
There
these are
needs
the
to be
ones who say that
consequences for people.
openly. And there
Yeah,
may be people who don't say that openly because they realize that they have a
yeah,
chance of getting fired. What if they sabotage? What if they engage in malpractice, in deliberate
hmm,
sabotage? So
yeah.
this is the kind of thing I'm worried about. They may not
Yeah.
be going out and firebombing or throwing Molotov
Yeah, yeah.
cocktails or
They
whatever.
will they will they will serve the cause based
Mhm.
on the position that they have in their life currently. So whether
Yeah.
they're a teacher, whether they're a doctor, a police, this,
Hmm.
that, and the other, but it will come out. It will come
Hmm.
out. And that's when you can catch it, right? That's the only time it'll be able to be caught.
Yeah, it's scary that they isn't, if there's a mass indoctrination process for all these people, which is basically the college education, but there isn't a
Mhm.
mass deprogramming practice for them,
Yeah.
there really isn't like a post-college practitioner get on with real life and see, maybe
Yeah.
someone should offer for them to go to some place where there's a high degree of political upheaval and volunteer for 6 months in some capacity.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, a lot of us have ideas in mind what we can do, but I'm not very confident. I don't think anybody's really taking us up on these options, and people are just so polarized, they don't even want to hear an alternative
Oh,
opinion. They don't
what
even want
is
to hear
the
it.
what is the alternative opinion? Just to conclude on a positive note, in case somebody does pick it up
Uh,
from listening to the program.
okay, okay. I am very utilitarian. I just deal with what works. I don't
Sure.
care how it sounds.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what you need to make a distinction between the very idealistic sounding things that people say, right? Nobody is going to say we support oppression and we support killing children and well, unless
Mm-hmm.
it's Hamas, right? But
You're right.
uh, so there's very idealistic, flowery, perfect language. Like you are a fool if you think that in this world in which we live, that is made up of these human beings, that you think we're gonna ever live a perfect society where everything's gonna be perfect, where there's no racism, there's no poverty, and there's no murders, and there's no rapes, and there's no fraud, and there's no lying, and there's no cheating and stealing. That's part of our human condition, unfortunately, including terrorism, by
Sure.
the way, right? So don't set yourself up for disappointment in expecting a perfect world.
Sure.
The world is not perfect. It's ugly. It's messy. Okay. So that's the first reality check that you need. The second reality check is the the things that I'm engaging in, is it going to harm me or help me in my life?
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying these things, I'm attending protests, I'm getting, you know, there's like police are collecting information on me, God knows who else is, right? Meanwhile, I'm freely giving my information to corporations while I criticize the government for collecting information.
Mhm.
Okay. All right. Like it's a complete, like, don't you realize that what you're doing to yourself? And then I think the third thing I would say, right, is how how are my kids going to view what I've been doing? You might think, yeah, I want my kids to see me as a person who stood up for what was right. Great. But when it's connected with all this controversy, do you think that's what they're actually going to see? They're going to see the controversy, and they're going to make the immediate association that you're associated with a controversial movement or a controversial activity. Now, you can try to preach to them, you got to stand up for what's right, no matter what, this and that, blah, blah, blah. Sounds great again. Very fluffy, very flowery, wonderful. But you are, let's say, you know, uh, the primary worker in the family, or you're a full-time worker, your partner is a part-time worker, or both of you are full-time workers. You've gotten a house, you've got an apartment, you have kids, this and that. And because you couldn't control your mouth and your emotions, now you're out of a job. What's that going to do to your family? Paying rent, groceries, car, this, that, blah, blah, blah. You can tell yourself all you want. I don't care if I get fired. I'm going to do the right thing no matter what. Okay. Until now, you got to move into a two-bedroom apartment because you can't afford the rent because now you're unemployable. All fun and games until you turn your life into garbage because of thinking that you were going to change the world, right? Because you're not going to change the world. The world changes at its own pace, right? You going on and protesting and waving flags and waving banners and this and that, completely useless. That's not going to change, especially foreign conflicts that have been ongoing for decades, if not centuries, depending on how far back you want to go. You think you marching today in 2025 in New York is you're gonna free Palestine? Okay. Let me know when you've done that and I'll convert to your cause.
Uh, well, this sort of activism has also been going on for decades with
Yeah,
identical results, by the way. But
yeah,
it's become sort of bigger and more visible because there's also foreign money. It's better
yeah,
organized. They've
yeah.
learned kind of
And the
that
mass media, the mass media
Mhm.
is the
And
force
social
multiplier.
media. In the 70s, they
Yeah,
didn't have the social media. They had the
right.
protests. They
They
had the
had
social media.
flyers.
Yeah.
They had flyers, right.
hmm Now they've got all the Twitter, and you don't even know
Right to
who's the
your
real
phone.
person.
Yep,
Mhm.
yep.
Oh man, I just feel, I'm actually surprised that no one is doing what you're doing because people, okay, some people have, got actually, it's actually exactly the opposite. There was a New York Times article just the other day, literally just the other day. It talked about a bunch of kids who did not get their diplomas because they were involved in violent riots on
Yeah,
campus. They called it protests, but obviously those were violent riots. That's why they didn't get the diplomas, not because they just waved the flag. It's obviously because they were, being disruptive and violated regulations. But
yeah.
um,
They said we don't regret it at all.
yes, that's the one you were
Uh,
talking about.
uh,
So New York Times is glorifying the people who not only ruined their own future, but also, like
yeah.
their message to everybody else. Instead of learning from these guys' examples and not doing that, oh look, they're idealists and they're standing up for their cause
Hmm.
regardless. Instead,
Right.
the message should be they're losers and they're going to pay for it. Don't be like them.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, well, let them be a living example of that, right? They will see. They will see that it's going to ruin their life. And unfortunately, you don't realize that until later when you're in that situation and you're like, oh my God, I ruined my life. So that's what happens, right?
Yeah, well, New York Times certainly did them no favors, I can tell you that. But
Well,
yeah, thank you so much for these insights because a lot of the times the things I hear from people are just complete fluff. They just, I'm sorry, they're very
yep.
general and they don't come from experience and they come from people, thinking very theoretically what should happen and not what actually
Projection.
does. not what actually does happen in specific scenarios. How do people
Yeah.
actually react? What happens when you confront somebody? What happens when you end up in the situation of, infiltrating these organizations? How do you win their trust? What does it take
Hmm.
to be around these types of people? Nobody talks about that. They just talk about,
Hmm.
oh, and
Well,
then
because they have no experience in it. So how are they gonna talk about it, right?
oh,
And
and then a lot.
who you even gonna interview, right?
Yeah.
As a data source to give
Mhm.
you that information, right? So it is it's a lack of knowledge, right? Lack of data.
But one step worse than the academics, because at least they're trying to get data, are the journalists
Oh,
who,
okay.
who
I thought you were gonna say lawyers. Lawyers out
no,
there. Sorry
lawyer.
about that.
Well, the lawyers
Uh,
just, they just do what they need to
yeah,
do to make
yeah,
money.
yeah.
So I get that.
Right,
But
right,
but the
right.
journalists who think they know when they actually don't, and especially I love the ones who cry Islamophobia. But then what do you do when you confront someone who's a Muslim expert in this and does this? Have you had encounters with those types
Yeah,
of
oh
people?
yeah, oh yeah. Oh yeah, of course I mean they have to outgroup you, right? So you have to a label has to be thrown on you and the label has to be a bad word, right? So remember we were saying earlier, a Zionist. Oh, if he's a Zionist, well, I can even kill his babies if I wanted, right?
Sure.
He's a Zionist. So I'll be a sellout, I'll be whatever they call me. I
Hmm.
heard all these things, years and years from the Toronto case, from my time with ISIS, like countering ISIS. Uh, you still get this stuff, right? Like it's the same stuff, right? And I just, you know what? I don't care because it used to bother me a lot. It did.
Hmm.
In the beginning, it used to bother me a
Hmm.
lot because I wanted to show, no, I'm being truthful and it's real and whatever. And I was just like, you know what? I don't care. I don't care. I practice my religion. I practice Islam. I pray. I do my readings. I do all that, and I know that I'm doing the right thing because what these people are doing, the biggest crime and sin, I would say, depicting Islam in this way that now people hate Islam. And what a Muslim wants is for a person to understand their creator.
Hmm.
That right? And Islam really, I explain to my kids, Islam is a personal relationship between you and your Lord. Now, when you are now depicting Islam in this negative way, you are blocking people from coming to learn about their Lord and their Creator. And this is a big, big sin in Islam. So, and the other thing about the Islamophobia is that the Prophet, alayhi salam, himself told us that these people will come with, hyper worshiping. They will recite the Quran, but it will not go beyond their throat. This was the most common phrase referring to the Khawarij, and then now you have the modern scholars, like good scholars, Sheikh Muhammad al-Yaqubi, for example, is in a Syrian scholar, descendant of the Prophet, peace be upon him, in UK now, and he wrote a fatwa against ISIS. And he said ISIS are like Khawarij, right? So we actually have a religious justification for fighting terrorists who wear the costume of Islam. And they're like, to me, they're imposters. To me, it's like the devil himself said, how can I really mess things up for believers in general, not just Muslims? Right? Anyone would think that, oh, this is what people who believe in God do. Screw it. I don't believe there's a God, right? Promoting that. So it's like Satan himself just grew a beard, put on a turban, put on a robe, said Allahu Akbar, and that's it. And he's done a great job of it.
It's fair to say that they're probably the biggest sources of Islamophobia.
Thank you. They are the number one driver of Islamophobia in the world. Yes. So they will look, they can, the people are not stupid. People
Hmm.
see through their public relations statements that they make. Okay.
Hmm.
You know, you can say, we condemn, we condemn, we condemn. Condemning is not enough. You need to take actions.
Hmm.
Anybody can condemn. Anybody can condemn. And then what happens? When somebody condemns it, well, then I end up getting condemned. Oh, but yes, we're against terrorism, but not like what he did. Oh, well, how exactly? So this is what really got me, this is what really turned me off from the Muslim community. And again, this is when I say Muslim community, I'm really talking about like Salafi influence, Muslim Brotherhood influence. They're all part of the same group, right? Like we belong to the Sufi side of things. Sufis, really promote personal relationship with God. We
Mm-hmm.
don't get caught up in these emotional things, these political things, because for us, every political leader that you can name, king, queen, whatever, they're all slaves to the creator. All right.
Mm-hmm.
The creator is the king of everyone and the
Mm-hmm.
ruler and master of everything. So we're indifferent whether it's this guy is in power, that one is in power. For us, it's like, well, how is your relationship with your Lord? And what are you putting out into the world? That is the most important thing, right? It's like the Khabib, the MMA fighter, a very good thing. He goes, people don't read the Quran and Sunnah. They read you, so act like it.
That's actually a really good point. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your insights. It was incredibly valuable conversation, and I really enjoyed it as well. And
Very welcome, very
for
welcome.
everyone watching, I hope this will actually get you to start looking at some of these issues beyond what you're used to hearing, beyond some of the academic tropes, and just look into deeper, look at different angles, different perspectives. Look at, if you have a chance to interact with the practitioner, ask them some questions, ask them about their perspective, and if you see something about read about specific examples of how these issues are being addressed. It's good to have theoretical basis and knowledge and data, but you also want to see what actually happens, in practice, and that I think will help shift the discussion to something more practical and more solution oriented. Because at the end of the day, what is the point of analyzing all of this if we can't come up with ways to minimize the harm being done to our communities, to our family,
Exactly.
to people we care about? For those watching us, we'll be back next week, Tuesday night. As always, the Washington Outsider Report on the Coalition Radio, 9 p.m. Thanks for joining us and have a great evening.